Mario+Rabbids Kingdom Battle was a genuine delight when it launched some 5 years ago. This Switch-exclusive title combined XCOM-style tactical gameplay with beautiful graphics and animation. It was made by Ubisoft, but it had all of the polish that you'd expect from a Nintendo first-party title. And it arrived just a few months after the Switch debuted. Well, Mario and the Rabbids are back again in Mario+Rabbids Sparks of Hope. This sequel promises a massively expanded scope alongside a reworked, more flexible combat system. Tech-wise, we're looking at another outing for Ubisoft's Snowdrop game engine, the toolset best known for powering The Division and its sequel. So have the graphics taken a similar leap, or has the expanded scope meant limiting visual fidelity? I really enjoyed Mario+Rabbids Kingdom Battle, but it was a fairly simple game. The complexities of XCOM-style turn-based combat were boiled down to the bare essentials, with a small handful of abilities per character and limited tactical options. Kingdom Battle's pitch-perfect translation of the Mario aesthetic was the real highlight here, as the formula ran a bit thin by the game's conclusion. Sparks of Hope radically reworks the first title's combat. Gone are the movement grids, which have been replaced with a fully analog traversal system. It's less contemplative, and feels like a more natural fit for a console controller. Critically, you can move a character as much as you'd like within certain boundaries without progressing through a turn, which makes lining up abilities less stressful. Other actions, like throwing bombs and executing team jumps, are now fully unmoored from turns as well, and require a bit of real-time dexterity to pull off. In general, Sparks of Hope feels much more engaging than the first outing, and that doesn't just come from the mechanical tweaks. The game actually requires some serious strategy at times. Kingdom Battle was almost painfully easy, and most of the game's systems could be ignored if you felt so inclined. But Sparks of Hope demands tactical play, even on its default difficulty setting, as enemies can punish you with massive damage if you do make a mistake. The player experience outside of combat is overhauled as well. Kingdom Battle structured its overworld like an old-school Mario title, with larger worlds broken up into individual combat levels on a linear path, with a fixed-angle camera system that typically showed an isometric gameplay view. Everything was neatly integrated into the same 3D environment, and transitions between combat and exploration were seamless. In contrast, Sparks of Hope has large, RPG-style worlds with NPCs, quests, and a conventional right-stick third-person camera. Some of the novelty of the first game has been stripped away. The combat areas are now totally separate, for instance, and the game's visual language bears less resemblance to classic Mario titles. But it seems like a worthwhile trade-off for its flexible, Mario Odyssey-like structure. Visually speaking, Sparks of Hope initially seems to share a lot of DNA with its predecessor. Simple, low-density textures combine with capable rendering tech to create a pleasing, cartoony visual signature. On the surface, not much seems to have changed, but the more I played, the more I got the sense that something unexpected had happened, and not necessarily for the better. Mario+Rabbids Kingdom Battle packed a ton of polygonal detail into just about every asset on screen. Anything from a wooden bridge to a brick barrier to a storefront was perfectly rounded off with plenty of triangles. It gave the impression of a game running on a more powerful system, with model quality well ahead of other contemporary Switch software. Sparks of Hope tends to use a much more angular look. Most of the environmental assets have been rendered with fewer polygons. Objects like rocks that used to be loaded with geometry are reduced to a series of simple flat faces. This does have implications for lighting as well, as the soft, smoothly lit look of Kingdom Battle is rendered a little bit harsher here, with a tendency to look more flat-shaded. Texture art can look very different as well. Kingdom Battle tended to use texture art with low-frequency detail, but used some techniques, like normal mapping, to give an impression of height and more complex shading. Shards of Hope has broad, brushstroke-style patterns drawn into certain environmental textures, which now appear very flat and lack the incidental geometric and normal mapped detail featured in the original title. Speaking of textures, the high polygon geometric foliage from the original game has been swapped out for the typical alpha-tested foliage textures. In other areas, foliage has been altered or stripped back as well, Kingdom Battle shader effect for high density grass is absent here, for instance. The key thing here is that the new visual style works perfectly well on its own terms. Take the water, for instance. Sparks of Hope has flat, relatively opaque water with cartoon-style ripples. It looks perfectly fine and blends well with the geometry. The shifting, translucent, Super Mario Sunshine-style water from the original was luscious, but the new water looks good too. The same could be said of the foliage. It looks good and fits well within a lower density style, even if certain elements were more complex in Kingdom Battle. I do think that the game's expanded scope probably pushed the developer in this direction, however. With a free camera system and larger levels, there's simply a much greater amount of variation in what the player can see at any given time. Before, the environment could be carefully crafted to stay within a certain frame time budget and to look good from a specific angle. This worked wonders for Kingdom Battle and has paid dividends in other games on Switch, most notably Luigi's Mansion 3, which leveraged a fixed perspective viewport to crank up asset quality as well. But in Sparks of Hope, those factors are harder to control. At the same time, there are strong artistic elements to the new style. The contrast between the sharp-looking environments and the geometrically dense character and enemy models creates an interesting visual clash and makes most shots quite easy to read visually, despite the expanded view distance and scope. Perhaps a game that used a more homogeneous visual style, like the original, would be a bit more complex to navigate with a free camera. But Kingdom Battle so thoroughly nailed the Mario aesthetic that the deviations here feel a little bit unfortunate. Kingdom Battle was reaching for a CGI style look, while Sparks of Hope looks a little bit more flat, cartoony, and sharp. Navigating most of the game's environments, you do get the sense that the original title's high-density, rounded look ultimately looked more appealing than what we have here. Taken in isolation, Sparks of Hope is still a visually pleasing game, but put it head-to-head with its 5-year-old predecessor, and it seems more like a side grade than a step forward. That's a totally fair trade-off for more interesting world design and larger combat arenas, if that is indeed what's occurred. But this doesn't come across as an evolution of the technology and style showcased so brilliantly in Kingdom Battle, and I can't help but feel a little bit disappointed. So visual features don't exactly impress, but how does image quality fare? To cut this short, if you've played the original Mario+Rabbids game, you'll know exactly what to expect here. In docked play, we're getting a 900p resolution, which is cut down to 600p in portable mode, backed up by what appears to be a post-processed AA. There's no TAA, no signs of reconstruction, no indication of dynamic res, just a straight fixed pixel image with a simple post-AA. Despite the relatively basic techniques in play, image quality is decent for the most part. The resolutions are sensible for a Switch game, and the low-density art style upscales without much artifacting, though edge aliasing is still a bit of an issue. But more advanced Switch software has embraced sophisticated image treatment tech to boost image quality and lower rendering load, and none of that seems to be active here. And that's really too bad, because Mario+Rabbids Sparks of Hope could definitely use some extra performance. The game targets 30 FPS and does manage to hit that target most of the time without frame pacing issues. There's no motion blur or anything like that to make it feel smoother, but in general play the game is usually a pretty solid 30 FPS. But there are plenty of scenarios where frame rates can momentarily suffer. Navigating the various worlds can chug at times, causing dips to the mid-20s even with little of consequence on screen. Cutscenes are pretty messy, often hanging in the 20s for long periods, and sometimes suffering from frame time spikes. Kingdom Battle could drop frames in similar scenarios also, though it was typically much better behaved. Combat is problematic as well. The typical culprits cause issues, big alpha effects and zoom-ins for certain abilities. Frame rates take a hit and can drop pretty hard, although usually the game will return to 30 FPS within a few seconds. Some of the larger combat arenas can suffer from extended FPS problems, however, just while navigating the environment or lining up abilities. The silver lining, I suppose, is that Sparks of Hope is mostly turn-based. These issues have little to no impact on playability most of the time, although they would have serious effects on a more fast-paced title. I definitely found the deviations annoying, but they didn't detract too much from my enjoyment of the game. But these should have been cleaned up, particularly the issues that seem firmly GPU related, like the drops caused by alpha effects, and perhaps a bit of dynamic resolution or reconstruction would do just the trick. As a final complaint, I did notice a handful of issues with compressed seeming texture art at times. There are a fair number of in-engine pre-encoded cutscenes in the game as well, which suffer from pronounced macro blocking and artifacting. Sparks of Hope occupies just 5.8 gigabytes as a digital download, which is probably a cut too far given its size and scope. A couple of extra gigabytes could have largely gotten rid of these occasional problems. I'm of two minds about Mario+Rabbids Sparks of Hope. On the one hand, the game is an excellent evolution of the first title that confidently reworks XCOM-style combat around flexible, controller-centric mechanics. It has hugely broadened scope, more interesting levels, and a modernized game structure. The isometric retro stylings of Kingdom Battle are gone, replaced with a keenly designed, wide-open adventure that stands on its own. If the first game was Super Mario 3D World, then this is Super Mario Odyssey. On the other hand, I love the way that Kingdom Battle looked. At the time of its release in 2017, it was perhaps the best looking game available on Switch, with stunning environments and beautiful art. For Sparks of Hope, I was hoping for a reprise of the same style, expanded with new technology. Instead, this game takes a left turn for a different graphical look that makes significant compromises on environmental density. The new game still looks totally reasonable, but I wish that the style of the original title had been more closely matched here. Less subjective, however, are the frame rate issues. Sparks of Hope can feel unstable, with dense environments, alpha effects, and cutscenes all causing problems. The pretty conventional rendering setup is not well suited for a graphically sophisticated Switch game in 2022, so image quality is preserved here somewhat at the expense of performance. Dynamic res, reconstruction, TAA, these techniques could have allowed for significant compromises on pixel count to improve frame rates, and may have enabled the developer to stick closer to the geometrically dense style of the original title as well. But ultimately, Sparks of Hope is a bigger, broader, and better adventure than the original game. It's not the same sort of console-exclusive technical stunner, but its gameplay and design are much improved. Fans of the original game would be well advised to check this one out. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and press the bell for YouTube notifications. Check out the Patreon at digitalfoundry.net for exclusive and early access content. And to get in touch, just use Twitter. Thanks for watching.